WNYC-TV presents Barbara Lee Diamonstein and...
Green, that's all. Hello, I'm Barbara Lee Diamonstein, and our guest today is the ultimate cultural catalyst, Brendan Gill. He is also the author of books, the most recent, Summer Places, short stories, plays, film and theater criticism, most of it for The New Yorker. Brendan Gill is also the chairman of the board of the Institute of Art and Urban Resources, the New York Landmarks Conservancy, and the Municipal Art Society. He is a member of the New York City Cultural Commission and has had long-term involvement with the Morgan Library, the Victorian Society, the Film Society of Lincoln Center, and I guess several others. A very warm welcome to you, Brendan. As this lengthy introduction to you reveals, you've had many voluntary commitments in your life, but only one job during your entire career. Can you tell us the circumstances of that employment, and how did a restless fellow like you come to stay in any one place for so long a time?
Well, the circumstances of my going to the New Yorker was that were that I sold my first short stories to them immediately after getting out of college, and so they asked me to come down to New York and go to work. And so I've never really got a proper job in my life, and I know very little about how to get a job, and I would know very little about getting a job if I were not to be employed by the New Yorker. But the reason I was able to stay there for the succeeding 43 years is because there are many jobs inside the New Yorker, and so instead of having just done one task there, I have had the wonderful opportunity to do as many different things as I wanted to do. I've been a book reviewer, I've been a movie reviewer, I've been a theater reviewer, I've written short stories, anything that I wanted to do.
Talk of the Towner, poetry.
Sean, Ross and Sean, the two editors over that period, have been very eager to have me do, and this has given me a kind of freedom inside what seems to be confinement. So it hasn't been a life sentence in any way. And moreover, the opportunity provided by being a drama critic is that you have a very easy job indeed. As Ken Tynan, one of my predecessors, said, this is not a job for a grown man. You have many months off, and it's in those months off during the summertime and in intervals during the winter that I'm able to write my books. So it's been a very agreeable kind of place to be, always to be doing exactly what I wanted to do and never to be under any pressure to work very hard.
That's not true about you.
Is
it still a job for a grown man? Is there something you'd rather be doing than being the drama critic of the New Yorker?
No, but I would like to have one more life, well, maybe two more lives before my life ends, and I've had a succession of lives, and you accommodate to life by new lives as you grow older, because the Brendan Gill that I was in my 30s is now so far gone, he's so nearly totally dead, that I sometimes salute him in memory and say, oh, what a splendid young man you were, because I was, in many ways, as a domestic being, a simply splendid person. That splendid person died.
To be replaced and resurrected by what? And the Phoenix?
Somebody else who works all the time. When I was young and a young husband and a young father, I did very little work. I would write for a week and then I'd loaf for a week, and I'd write for a week and I'd loaf for a week. And I could make enough money in those days to do that. And then as you grow older, and the nice young people that you were disappear, then the sour, embittered, disagreeable elderly figure emerges who works all the time, which is what I do now. I mean, I work 7 days a week, and I play 7 days a week, but
that is your usual week, 14 days.
It comes to 14 days a week.
And what would you rather be doing than being the drama critic? Or would you be?
I wouldn't want to, no, I love being a drama critic. I would like to have gone on being the movie critic, except it would have looked as if the New Yorker were cutting corners, which it wasn't. And so Penelope Gilliard and Pauline Kael came in to take my place, and more than take my place, I have to admit. But I would love, for example, if the opportunity arose to write about architecture for the New Yorker. Ever since Lewis Mumford retired, Sean, out of sentiment, has not let anybody usurp the department heading of the Skyline, which is what Lewis Mumford called his department in the New Yorker. But since he hasn't come back to write for us, and since almost 20 years has passed, it's really high time that we did have an architecture department. And Sean and I have talked about the possibility of my someday doing that. And
I hope this serves as a press release. I like the idea.
But also I have strong feelings that it is right for for a drama critic ought to be younger than I, and younger than any of my colleagues. I have very elderly colleagues. It's the most geriatric set you ever saw in your life. And it's not fair to young dramatists to be reviewed by people who are old enough to be their parents. The most thrilling theater in New York now is the work of young men and women, black and white, who are all in their 20s and 30s. And what on earth how are they being passed judgment on by the likes of us?
And
It's not right.
specifically, who do you have in mind? Who is doing the most exciting work in the theater these days?
There are 20
tell us some of
playwrights,
them.
and I would say there's Rabe and Babe for a rhyming name, and of course
David and Thomas.
Shepard and Mamet and all Mullins and there are, I would say, at least 20 vivid young playwrights who are doing first-rate work. And they are people who have lived a different life from the kind of life that my generation ever knew. And we are not in immediate sympathy with them. We have to practice sympathy, I think, for their work. And I don't think that that's ideal. But my colleagues, needless to say, do not feel the same way.
Your writing spans a period of nearly 5 decades. Is there a key element that describes, and also the writing is on a variety of subjects, but is there a key element that describes your concerns?
No, I think that what I went from was the writing poems and short stories, which is what young writers do anyway. That they tend to begin by expressing something inside themselves.
Yeah.
And then I have, like so many people, become increasingly repertorial over the last 3 or 4 decades. It's plainly my lifetime has been the lifetime which saw the triumph of fact over fiction. It has been very evident that a great improvement in the quality of writing about factual matters has taken place. Journalism has become a much loftier profession than it was when I was young, and fiction has with some difficulty held its own. We have 3 or 4 or 5 good fiction writers, but we have scores of good journalists who write very competently indeed, and this transformation is highly visible in the New Yorker magazine, among other places. But we have been among the pioneers, and having seen to it, the reporters worked hard and did very fine work indeed, instead of fugitive journalism of the kind that used to be practiced, where nobody paid any attention because it was going to be forgotten in a week.
Well, this isn't a very good time for writers of short stories, I suspect.
It's more difficult for that than ever before, because there are fewer outlets, and unluckily art follows economics, and if there are not enough magazines that will pay enough writers to write enough short stories, we won't have the form. The form will
What is
disappear.
the future of the art form?
Difficult for that very reason. There are only 3 or 4 magazines in America that could possibly pay anybody enough to write short stories, and the New Yorker is one of them. Maybe Playboy. Esquire used to be, but I don't think it is going to be. And
Harper's.
it's
from
very
time to
hard. But when I was young, in my early 20s, there were 15 to 20 magazines for which I could write
Little
short stories.
magazines, too.
Well, but they didn't pay very much. But the big Bow Wow magazines all wanted short stories and paid a lot. Saturday Evening Post, I used to be published by, Ladies' Home Journal, Good Housekeeping, Collier's, Liberty. It was fantastic. So any
Are you
young
writing a
writer-
short story now?
Oh yeah, I try to write. As soon as I finish my next book, which is a biography of Stanford White, I'm going back to do a book of fiction, which will be 4 novellas that
I hope one of them is Fat Girl.
No, these are going to be all new, and then I'll have one more book of fiction, I hope, at least. But I have several projects that will carry me right up to the edge of the grave, and perhaps into it.
Your latest book, Summer Places, you say, "Summer places, to me," and I'm quoting you now, are the words that are among the most haunting in the language. The sound of their mingled syllables seems to hint that something exceptionally pleasurable is about to happen, and you have a very vivid recollection of what happened to you in summer places in your own life. Where was your own favorite summer place?
Well, I began in a little town in Long Island Sound in Connecticut called Woodmont, and where we had a great big house, and where the family gathered every summer, and it was very important to me. And I have a strong feeling, and I've shared this inquiry with many of my friends, that there is a link between childhood and summertime, which is very important. And if you have happy memories of your childhood, they usually linked somehow to summer and not to winter, although in winter we are changing much more radically than we are in summer. We're under the stress of school, we are being turned into whoever we have to become. But it's summertime with sunlight and water and air and starlight, that seems to last longest in our memories and nourish us all the rest of our lives. So we are nourished in our 60s by memories of what it was to be 6.
And you say in summer places that summer is the time where memories are most vivid, where life is most intense. How did the first summer places come into existence? In a mere handful of generations, man went from fearing solitude to seeking it, and that's one of the points that you make so eloquently in Summer Places. How did that all happen?
There were several aspects of this thing. Actually, oddly enough, before the white man got here, people in this country were going away for the summer because Indians went away for the summer, and the Iroquois nation...
Where did the Indians go for the summer?
Well, for example, the Iroquois nation, which was in northern New York State, traveled all the way to Flat Rock, North Carolina, to have a big powwow in the summertime down there. And they were always on the move, and they went to different places in summer from where they went in winter. And when the white man arrived, the Indians very kindly showed the white man the mineral springs, which for them had great power, magical power, and the white man, with characteristic generosity, kicked the Indian off his own mineral springs and turned those into spas, because our ancestors were very, had a Puritan kind of culture, and they believed that if they were going away to have a good time, they had to justify it in the name of health. So the first summer resorts in the United States grew up around mineral springs where people could stand about and drink the vile water and bathe in it and feel that they were getting healthier.
Well, obviously our country has changed, and so have tastes. And yesterday's gilded playgrounds are often today's commuter suburbs, or less than gilded, or less than their gilded past. What are the most enduring summer places?
Well, for one summer resort, of course, Saratoga has been in existence for over 150 years. Flat Rock, North Carolina, where the Iroquois were, was known as the Little Charleston of the mountains in the 1820s, because rich Charlestonians went right up through the state to the first elevation they could get. Before air conditioning, you had only choices between going into the mountains or seeking out a body of water, either the ocean or a stream or a lake. And so the Charlestonians either went to Flat Rock.
They obviously went to the mountains since they were on the water, and all that humidity would drive them.
Well, no, they
to an
also went
elevation.
to Newport. See, Newport has been a summer resort for 200 years, and the rich Charlestonians, sailing in their own bottoms, took their families north and spent the summer in Newport, not because they were seeking more water, but because in Charleston in summer there was yellow fever and cholera and all kinds of disease, malaria. And you couldn't stay in the South in summer with safety, and so they came north to avoid all those plagues. And the same way in Louisiana or in Alabama, Mississippi, what they were escaping was not only the terrible heat, which they could perhaps have accommodated to, but the disease and the dreadful sicknesses and stench and filth of cities in the 18th and early 19th centuries. It was a matter of health again.
What is your own special favorite?
Well, I think the place that I've been spending summers for 43 years, Norfolk, Connecticut, which is in the Berkshires, is plainly our favorite, because that means most to our family. And I think also with summer places that summer places mean much more to families than winter places do, or at least that's my experience.
Is it climate rather than architecture that causes that?
It's climate. I think that we get into our skins in summer. We take off more clothes, we're nakeder. It's easier to make love, it's easier to embrace, it's easier to hug and kiss. We are closer to sunlight, we're closer to all the elements from which we come. I never dive into salt water that I don't have a lively sense that I'm coming home, because after all, in the womb, we're paddling about in salt water for 9 months before we emerge, and air is inimical to the newborn child, just as it was to us 2 million years ago, when our proper home was the sea.
Well, if it is ambiance, then obviously the same thing would hold true in winter in the tropics.
Well, it's very puzzling about what people would do in winter about that, and I've never explored that. That's another book, I hope.
Book number 2.
Book number 2.
I like the whole idea.
Yeah.
And I suggest Jamaica or Lyford Key to start with.
I heard that was rather bleak, Lyford Key.
I've never been.
Yeah.
And for another key now, and that is, how does a resort become popular? Is it invention? Is it because tastemakers or trendsetters or column names go there, or is it spontaneous generation? Is it real estate development, or is it...
It can be all of those different things. You see, in the 19th century, when many of these places began, not only were they resorts like Newport, which were served really to preserve the health of people, but the fashion grew up out of the kind of people who went there, whatever the reason they had gone to be there in the first place. Then the religious revivals of the 19th century dictated immense changes in our notion of summer resorts. Martha's Vineyard, now an extremely fashionable place to spend the summer, was the chief campgrounds of the Methodist sect. As many as 60,000 Methodists would go to Martha's Vineyard in summer and pitch tents and cast straw on the ground and sleep there in very rigorous simplicity in pursuit of God. And the same thing was true of the Methodists in the Middle West. So when God went out the window, which is exactly where I think he went, fashion came in, and many of the places which had begun simply as religious camp meeting grounds are now extremely fashionable places.
Did you visit each of the places that you write about?
Oh, Dudley and I covered I don't know how many thousands, tens of thousands of miles. We went all the way across the Gulf Coast.
When did you do all of
North
that?
Carolina. By not sleeping, by not eating.
And we know you don't do either of the
playing.
two.
No. We found time to do it.
How long a time did it take you
at
to
about 90
research
miles
it?
an hour in tires, which he told me as we were going 90 miles an hour along a highway once. He said, "This is the original set of tires on this car. They've been 87,000 miles." I said, "Dudley, slow down." Oh.
Well, that's advice that you've never taken from yourself. You know everyone. You've been everywhere. You go everywhere. Where do you get all that energy, all that interest?
I don't have to take credit for the energy, because I think that's born into people.
Genetic.
And energy is.
How about psychic energy?
And then the choice of my life has been so easy that I've done everything that I wanted to do from one year to the next, that it isn't a question of ever feeling tired. I think people feel tired who are doing something which isn't really suited to them. And if you do something which is like play, why would you ever grow tired? I think many people who work seemingly very hard, I think FDR, for example, as president, loved being president so much that he was never tired a single day.
Let's hope the same thing is true with our Mayor Koch.
Yes, well, and there's some evidence that he does feel that way.
Yes, I
he
think so.
really rejoices in his job, and he can't get enough of it. And it's a very important thing. Jack Kennedy was the same way.
Well, in all these experiences of yours, these travels, these associations, who are some of the most memorable persons that you've encountered?
Well, as I teasingly say about FDR, he was certainly one of the most memorable, and so unreliable is memory as we keep altering it to perfect it and to make it closer to our heart's desire, that I'm reaching a point now where I'm becoming quite good friends with FDR, who I would not have the remotest notion who I was.
And your fondest recollection?
Actually, I did take care to meet most of my heroes in writing and architecture, so that I at least knew what Faulkner was like. I knew Hemingway, I knew O'Hara, I knew Thurber plainly, White, I knew James Gould Cousins, I knew most of the writers of my time, Bellow, Cheever, the contemporaries, John Updike, all those people. I like knowing them. I like hearing their voices and seeing how they breathe. That gives me a clue.
You haven't
to their
mentioned any
genius.
women in that list. That's very unlike you.
Well, it's maybe I'm preparing another list. You have
I
it on
hope
my
so.
list.
You have another list?
And then among architects, I've chosen to know as many of them as I could possibly know, because that's my avocation. And only Louis Kahn, I think, and Mies van der Rohe slipped through my fingers. Every other architect that I can think of, I have known. That's a field in which it would be very difficult to name women, because it is the profession, I think, that discriminates against women more than any other single profession I know.
Well, there are several that might compete for that distinction, but surely architecture would be at the very head of the list.
Scandalous, scandalous. Now, when I was naming the major novelists of the 20th century before, and it's true that I can't think of a major novelist of the 20th century in America who was a woman. And I wasn't in a position to know Willa Cather, for example, who was dead before I would.
How about Mary McCarthy?
And, well, I would think of her as a major novelist, although I think of her as a writer of great importance, but I think a lot of her documentary and repertorial writing, what we were saying before, is more valuable, probably, than The Women, for example, which is her biggest effort, or The Company She Keeps, which is an act of vengeance. And, you know, what women novelists can we think of who are to be thought
Eudora
of in terms
Welty.
of Hemingway? Well, not in terms of Hemingway and Faulkner and the others. It's not that we have 20 short story writers. Eudora Welty has written one or two novels, but 30 good short stories, and Flannery O'Connor, and we can name lots of short story writers.
Catherine Porter.
It's as if there were some choice on their part as to what was a fitting form for them and also where they wanted to appear.
Or their publishers, rather than the lack of expression on the part of the writer. Let's come back to some of your voluntary associations. You have been an urban activist almost without peer. Why do you do all of this? In fact, in your own words, and as I recall, and here at the New Yorker, you quote your uncle at some length, and the phrase goes something like, "No good deed goes unpunished." You spend a lot of your energy, a lot of your efforts in really trying to transform and maintain the face and the quality of this city. What impels you to do that?
Well, of course, the first thing that you'd have to suspect would be that it's a great satisfaction to me on the basis of ego.
No, altruism.
No, I don't
But
believe
I
in
believe in altruism, as you know.
I believe in ego, and I think that if you can choose a satisfactory expression for your ego, you may do good in the world. If you can't find a satisfactory expression for it, you'll do evil in the world. I think Hitler, for example, could find no satisfactory expression for his ego, so he was consummately evil. But there are other people who find a good use, surgeons, people like that find a good use for their ego, and they do good in the world. And plainly, it's been a great satisfaction to me to work as hard as I could in some of these fields and have some success. And then we have, as you know, many failures. We have far more failures than we do success. But the possibility of success seems to increase with the years. We are closer to the possibility that something good will come of the work we've been doing for 30 years.
Maybe an idea as time has come that you've helped create.
Well, also, but Ed Koch is the same way. That's why he works. I mean, the satisfaction is egotistical, but fruitful, perhaps good for the world. And the alternative doesn't exist, which is just to sit back and not do anything, because that would be contemptible.
You're known for your prodigious memory and your almost Byzantine-like office. You've repeatedly said that you don't keep memos. But it is legendary, Brendan, how architectural in appearance those piles of books and papers are in your office. Those towering pyramids of paper. I'm sure someplace somewhere you must know the Rosetta Stone to it all. What are you keeping? Is it possible that someone with your sense of history and preservation is disregarding and destroying the past?
It's amazing to me. I feel very guilty about that. I cannot keep any papers. I cannot.
I'm trying to shame you.
I know. There isn't I don't even keep newspaper clippings. I don't keep book reviews. When they're favorable, I don't keep them. There's not a record of in my office or anywhere that I ever saved any letter or anything of any kind, and I should have saved something.
And we must caution the audience, if they have any correspondence from you, to please hold on to it.
There'll be
a little box in the New York Times one day.
I only correspond with people who promise they'll tear up any letter they get from me as soon as they've received it. I feel like an amateur CIA the way I behave in regard to correspondence, but it's true.
Why do you do that?
Because it's a private matter, and
but you have such a sense of history. It so negates everything else you're about.
W.H. Auden felt the same way. Some writers do. And there again, it may be ego. Maybe I'm ashamed of not writing as well in letters as I would write in for public consumption. But Auden didn't think that any letter should be saved, and he didn't think that anybody should read anybody else's letters, and he could never resist reading all of them.
I am going beyond correspondence. I'm going beyond to just the whole archival nature of a career that is singular in this country. Do you ever plan to write your memoirs?
Oh, I will certainly do that as my mind goes. Everybody does that just as his mind goes.
What do you mean?
It's a sign of senility.
The first sign?
Yeah. And the longer the book gets, the more senile the writer of it, which threatens a 1,000-page work on my part.
How did your interest in landmarks and preservation and architecture evolve? Stanford White, the subject of your next book that we've heard about for some time now, you've been working on it over an extended period of time. It's a very serious and long-term and major effort on your part. How did you ever become so absorbed by Stanford White, and in turn your interest in architecture and in landmarks?
Well, I was a very little boy when I first became interested in architecture, certainly 4 or 5. And I think anybody who is going to be an architect or be interested in architecture is likely to develop that interest at that age. I was overturning all the chairs in our house and covering them with blankets and making them into castles and houses at a very early age. Unfortunately, my mother didn't disapprove of this thing, and when the maid would be furious with me for having dismantled my room, my mother would say, let him do whatever he likes just as well. So I was making blueprints by 7, and I've never not been interested in Stanford White because he has more houses misattributed to him than any other architect in history, and one of those houses is in Hartford, Connecticut, where I grew up, and every night my father would take a constitutional around the block and point out to me the house that Stanford White had designed. And of course, when I grew up, I discovered he hadn't designed it at all. But there was never a time I didn't know his name from the age of 5 or 6.
Why weren't you an architect?
It was too specific a profession when I had to take my courses in college. I wanted to remain more general. I didn't want to do all the mathematics that was necessary. I was revolted by mathematics.
You thought it was more mechanical than aesthetic?
Yeah, well, you had to pass certain, you had to take certain courses that I wasn't prepared to take.
But it hasn't stopped you from designing, including your own house.
That's why I fooled around with design, and now the greatest thing that ever happened was, of course, to be named an honorary architect this year. It doesn't let me do one single thing that I couldn't do before, but the honor is tremendous.
Did you ever expect your life to unfold the way it has?
Certainly not, but I'm awfully glad it did.
What did you have in mind?
Well, of course, I expected to be infinitely better writer than I became. But that's the dream of glory that everybody has, to be, to be Dickens or Thackeray or Dostoevsky or something like that. And then it turns out that one does the best one can in terms of one's talent, because that's what there is no possible way to judge at the beginning of life. But in terms just of having a good time, of racketing around the world, of amusement and interest, I wouldn't have expected it to be quite as full as it has been. I'm naturally, I've long since gone past knocking wood. Anything that happens to me from now on is acceptable by me, including death, because I've had such a good time so far.
If you had it to do all over again, what would you do otherwise?
I just think it'd run a little bit faster.
It's not possible. There must be some secret dream, however, that you harbor. Is there something you haven't?
I would like to written The Great Gatsby. I would like to written To the Lighthouse. There are 3 or 4 small, perfect works that I would like to have written. That's what one ought to have done. Or one perfect poem, a poem as good as a poem by Yeats. But those things are not to be commanded into existence. They wait upon happening.
And is there something that you are waiting to happen?
Well, I might do something. Yeats, just before he died in his 70s, Frank O'Connor, who was a great friend of mine, friend of his, said in his beautiful Irish voice, he said, "Yeats, if you live another 10 years, you'll be the greatest poet that ever lived." And Yeats said, "I've done everything I wanted to do." So that's the way one should end one's life.
That's the way we're going to end this program, with that thought for now. Thank you very much, Brendan Gill, writer, raconteur, traveler, visionary, whose latest book, Summer Places, is a delight to read, and it's always good to talk with you. Thank you, Brendan Gill. I'm Barbara Lee Diamonstein, and thank you, audience, for being with us too.